Hi there, it's Tony and Kris, the Pump House Records podcast.
And this one's going to be a great one. You want to talk about a story.
We are excited about this. He probably isn't what you would consider a household name, but he has been around a while, and he has got stories that are going to blow your mind. And
you won't believe them.
If they weren't true, you'd think, well, they're just writing a movie out together or something. But we're so excited to be joined by this young man, and we think you're going to love his story. Tim, Montana. Let's dive in.
Pump House Podcast. Pump House Podcast, baby.
So, Tim, man, we really appreciate it. We know you're obviously busy. The man he's traveling and still takes the time to chat with us. Thanks for being on, man.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's dive in. You had, when we were looking at some of your history and some of the things you've done and what you've written and performed and who you've worked with, you're kind of like a Forrest Gump of country music. You bump into these, you bump into Letterman, you get to be on the Letterman show. You bump into Billy Gibbons, and you're tied to ZZ Top. There's some great stories in your past.
Yeah, it's been a wild. I think I've done my career backwards. I'm like, you're not supposed to do the late show when you're starting out. You're not supposed to meet all your heroes first before you crank one up the charts, but that's how it happens, so I'm not questioning it.
Oh man, Letterman, that's just like one of my idols. That is so cool you got to do that.
Yeah, he was a super sweet guy. I met him in Choteau, Montana, and he booked me on the show. And you can see one of the rare videos of a beardless Tim Montana at the Ed Sullivan Theater if you go on YouTube. So and just know how terrified I was, because that is a scary place to play.
I mean, was that weird to be on a stage that you knew the Beatles and all that stuff that had happened? I mean, the history of that building?
Oh my God, yeah. Elvis Presley, the Beatles, Rolling Stones. I'm like, this is a interesting place to wind up when you're from a trailer house in remote Montana.
Yeah, well, and that's so we'll take that. We may come back and talk a little bit more about that, but let's take that opportunity to kind of segue. Let's talk a little bit about growing up and how you grew up and how you became a musician. Montana, obviously a big, beautiful state, but there is a lot of, there you go, a lot of big sky, a lot of big empty space out there. What was it like growing up in that area?
Yeah, we went off grid when I was probably 5 or 6 in Kyla, Montana, up north, and TV went away, video games went away, and I got a little nylon string guitar. And that became my friend for the next, 10, 12 years. Didn't have a lot of kids to play with, so I just had a guitar and a dog, and at night I'd light candles and lanterns and trim wicks, and I tell people I learned to play by candlelight, and they're like, no, but really? And I'm like, no, I literally had a lantern and a candle, and that's how I learned to play guitar, and that's why I'm just, okay today, because the lighting wasn't right. It was all about the lighting, so.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, it's something, because on the grid or off the grid, I mean, everybody makes choices in how they raise their kids, how they live their lives, and when you're young, because my parents lived, we were totally had all the comforts of home and everything, and I had video games, but we lived out on about 20 acres, and I didn't have a lot of close by friends where I could just run out and play with and stuff. Unfortunately, I didn't have musical talent like that to pick up a guitar and learn to play that way, but it can be challenging. How great was it for you, looking back, to have gotten that guitar and had that skill and to be able to take that time early in your life to hone a craft?
Yeah, it was good, because I have ADD, and I'm like, man, if I would have had cell phones and television, I don't know that I would have learned to play music like I did at that age. And I look at my kids, and they got video games, TV, and all this stuff going on, and I'm pushing them into music, because when I was a kid, I was, pushed away from music, but I bucked the system and was like, no, I'm going to play guitar. I don't care what you say. But I'm like, guys, hey, I'll buy you new instruments, drums, guitars, bass. I got it all. Like, let's play music. They're like, oh, no, Dad, we want to play Minecraft. And I'm like, oh, Jesus. But I'm glad I didn't have those distractions, because I don't know that I'd be a musician today if I had distractions all the time. So.
When did you're pretty isolated up there, learning guitar, playing by candlelight, all that. When did you decide I've got to make a move? Or, how did you get to, was it LA you went to from there? Where was it you went?
Yeah, so right about 17, I was thinking about college, but I was mainly thinking about going to the military. So I had recruiters at my house constantly, and I was trying to get my mom to sign the 17-year-old enlistment. Your parents have to sign off, and my mom just adamantly refused. She's like, if you're 18 and you want to do it. And so I had recruiters coming up all the time for dinner, and I wouldn't tell her, and she gets so mad because they just roll up to the trailer house in Montana like, hey, Mary, and they'd bring paperwork with them, and she wouldn't sign it. And I sent a tape off to LA in the midst of all that to Musicians Institute. The day I got my acceptance letter, she was like, "Thank you, Jesus." So I ended up going to LA, but that's when I was like, all right, this is the path for me. And that's, I think, today why I do a lot of military charity stuff is that I'm like, man, I didn't serve, and it kind of bugs me sometimes, but I'm like, I can serve those that served us. You know, there's other ways to help out and support guys, and I think we've made a big impact. Our American Thread Sporting Clay Shoot has raised over $1.1 million in 4 years, and we're all volunteer.
Wow.
We don't take a cut of nothing, and we write checks right to 501c3s that support veterans of PTSD or children of fallen soldiers, and to raise over $1 million in 4 years is pretty special. So.
It's incredible, yeah. And you make a great point. You know, it's not all of our destiny to serve like that, but there is nothing that keeps us from doing the things we can do to help those who are serving in that way. So good for you for figuring that out pretty early on.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
You're from LA, then what gets you to Nashville? When did you make the move to Nashville? Why did you decide to go to Nashville? Tell us that a little bit of that background.
Yeah, I was all things rock and roll when I went to LA. I got a skateboard, a bright yellow guitar with flames, and I was so running from being the Montana guy from the woods, even though my roommates were like, "Are you a caveman? Why do you keep putting metal in the microwave?" And I'm like, "What is this evil device you guys have that heats food I've
That's crazy
never
to think
seen?"
like that. Wow.
I never had a microwave or a dryer my whole life. And so I go to LA and I'm like, wow, you guys can dry clothes and nuke burritos. This is sick. But at some point, and I was so hiding from my Montana roots. I hated it because people were like, "You're kind of country." I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm the most heavy metal dude you've ever met." But at some point in the midst of all this, me, just hardcore trying to be rock and roll, so in metal, and I met a blind guitar player with a cowboy hat that came in, and I saw him do what Eddie Van Halen did with distortion with no distortion. And this guy's blind, and I was like, "How does he play an instrument like that and it's clean?" And my older brother's blind, so I had an immediate connection with him. And I said, "Hey, where do you live?" And he's like, "Nashville." I'm like, "If I move there, would you teach me how to play guitar?" And he's like, "Yeah, 100%." So like a year later, I failed out of music school the second time, but was like, I'm going to Nashville with that blind guy. And I know all about blind guys. My mom's an interpreter for the deaf. Like I said, my brother's blind, so I grew up around blind people and deaf people, and I know sign language, and there's just a connection there. And so I got to Nashville, and I was like, Johnny Highland is his name, and he's legendary, virtuoso. There's very few guys that have ever walked planet Earth that can play guitar like him. And I know for a fact when people are blind or lose a sense, they gain another one. And with blind people, a lot of times it's their ear and music. I mean, you guys have seen it before with, Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles and that blessed guy that Lee works with as well. I mean, Ronnie Millsap, it goes on and on and on and on. So I moved to Nashville, and I drove Johnny Highland around for a year and studied guitar under him, and I still can't play with 1% of his talent, but I learned a lot from him. So he kind of landed me in Nashville, and then he produced the record for me that got me booked on The Late Show with David Letterman and kind of gave me a taste. And I thought for sure after Letterman, my phone would ring off the hook, and I was like, "Baby, we're set. We're going to be so rich," because we were so poor when that happened. I remember we maxed out our Orchard Bank credit card on ribeyes about a week after it happened. So I'm like, "Oh, the phone's going to ring. We're signing a record deal. We're going to have hits." And the phone rang once from an agency that didn't sign me, and I had to go back to the drawing board and pay off that credit card. So
damn those creditors.
That's how I got to Nashville. Was Johnny Highland in Los Angeles convinced me to move out there, and I lived there until this August. I did 17 years in Nashville, and then recently moved back to Montana to a town of 40 people. So
back to the roots.
Oh yeah.
It's
trying to get my house off the grid. I'm trying to cut the power lines so my kids can know what it's like.
Yeah.
There you go.
Give them a taste, man. Give them a taste. Yeah, it's crazy to think how the world works and how those random meetings and the people that you run into and how they can change your life. I mean, that's an incredible story about meeting that guy and then how it changed your path.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't know, in the moment that your life has changed from that moment. Isn't that weird? You kind of look back a decade later and you're like, that was a pivotal thing that at the time, or 2 years later, I'd be like, okay, I moved to Nashville and nothing happened. But then 15 years later, you're like, oh, I moved to Nashville and a lot of stuff happened. Like, wow.
Man, that's wild. So now let's shift over to the Billy Gibbons factor. How did this connection come? Was it the beards? Did you connect over beards, or how did you guys get together?
100%. Yeah, I walked into a place to get my beard trimmed in Nashville, and this lady was sitting there in the barber's chair and said, you look like ZZ Top. And I said, boy, if I had $1 for every time I heard that. And she goes, I got a friend that knows Billy Gibbons. And I was like, boy, if I had $1 for every time I'd heard that. And then she's like, I'm going to try to link you with him. And I was like, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but boy, heard all these things a lot. And I said, well, if you got a guy that knows him, I got a song I just started called This Beard Came Here to Party. And so she got it to him. And he was on tour with Kid Rock at the time, who I didn't know Kid Rock at the time either. And he came to Nashville and happened to be on the same day I had the studio booked. Everything was pretty magical because I couldn't have afforded, as an independent artist to book the studio around his arrival. I just happened to have the studio booked that day because it was a day that was half off, and I took it,
Wow. Yeah.
And so he rolled in, we recorded the song, he left, and I thought, if that's the only time I get to see him and work with him, I'm luckier than the next guy. But he went to dinner that night, and he had the mix CD that they printed from the studio for him to listen to, and some guy walked up and said, ZZ Top, man, cool, took a photo with him, said, I place songs with sports teams. And I need a Beard song for the Boston Red Sox because they're in the playoffs. And Billy literally pulled the CD out of his pocket, put it in his hand. It gets sent to Fenway Park. It becomes the theme song for the Boston Red Sox. They win the World Series. And a week after that, me, Billy, and the Red Sox are on the cover of USA Today around the country. And I was like, that happened fast.
Yeah, no kidding, man. That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah, so
my mind is just blown.
Yeah, it was that fast. I've never seen something in the music business. Like 48 hours after we recorded it, I turn on national TV during the playoffs and they're playing my song. And it was the first time I'd ever watched a baseball game. And I'm like, is that a touchdown or what's happening on TV? Because when you grow up without TV, like sports are not in my stratosphere at all. Like I don't understand anything about sports. I like splitting wood and riding snowmobiles. That's about it. But watching them win the World Series with the song, and then shortly after, Billy Gibbons asked me to play the Ryman. Then he asked me to come on the Beer Drinkers and Hellraisers North American tour. We went all the way across North America, Canada, and here I am with 75 ZZ Top dates under my belt, a hot sauce company, and we just purchased the world famous Wise River Club with Mr. Gibbons as well in remote Montana, a little club up here. So we've become business partners, and he's about the best buddy I've ever had, and he's kind of my rock and roll dad,
Oh, that's awesome.
What an incredible story. My God, man. If that was the only piece of your story that, something like that happened, it would already be amazing. But then what you've already talked about, it's just like, dude.
And as well as I do, if anybody was watching a movie where and somebody said, oh, I play songs or whatever, and said, oh, yeah, here's you a Beard song or whatever, and that would never happen. People would watch that in a movie and go, too unbelievable.
They would call bullshit immediately. Yeah. But it's
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Man.
We've got over a decade of friendship under our belt now, and we keep rock and rolling, man, writing songs, and and he's been there for me. Even when, Nashville was saying no to me, Billy was always like, yep, I got to have him. And people would try to put other artists on his tour, and he'd put his foot down and say, no, I see something in this guy. I'm going to bring him out with me. So he just kept me under his wing for a decade. And so I sent him the charts today that were number 11 on nationwide on the rock charts. And I'm like, hey, your little decade investment's finally paying off, buddy. Thank you. So
that is incredibly cool. I mean, to have a story like that in your back pocket, man. Well, tell us a little bit, about what's happening like right this second. Yeah, we talked about a lot of history, but what's coming up? What are you working on? What can we look forward to seeing in the near future?
So wild thing, about a year ago, I used to hang out at this place called the Wise River Club, and I hung out there since I was a kid fishing with my Uncle Randy, and he passed away a few years ago. And it's in southwest Montana between Butte and Dillon on the Big Hole River, iconic trout fishing, elk hunting, snowmobiling, rafting. I mean, it's everything. I got the opportunity to purchase the place, and my first call was Billy Gibbons, and I said, hey man, this is a really good deal. This has been around since the late 1800s. It's a hotel, it's a lodge, it's a venue, it's a casino, it's a restaurant, it's so many things, RV park. And I said, we should do it. And he's like, well, who's going to run it? And I'm like, I've been looking for an excuse to get out of Nashville since I moved here, and I think this is the perfect excuse. And he said, all right. And so I kind of thought the dreams of Tim Montana being on the radio might have been over. I knew I could tour forever, and I knew I'd continue to make music, but I didn't know what the future held with me in radio, because it's been that unachievable goal for me for so long. I've written songs for other artists that have got on the radio, but I was always too rowdy for country music, and my beard was too long, and all these reasons why country radio wouldn't play my music. But I always had friends like Lee Brice put me on tour, and Michael Ray put me on tour, so I've got all those friends and connections for songwriting and whatnot. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to move to Montana and I'm going to stop worrying about this radio thing. So right before I left, I turned in a rock record, kind of as a middle finger. I just recorded, went real heavy because I grew up listening to grunge. And I was like, let's create some grunge style music, turn it into the label, and I'm sure they're going to drop my ass like yesterday's news. But I get a call. The closing date is August 30th on our bar in Montana. So I start moving my family up. I got 4 kids and a wife. And then I get a call from my label, and they're like, we think you have a hit record. And I'm like, what? And they're like, with Jelly Roll and Hardy and all these guys going to rock radio, we think you're the next guy at rock radio. And I was like, wow, well, what's the radio ad date? And they said August 30th. And I'm like, August 30th? That's weird because I'm closing on my new place in Montana August 30th. What is up with this date, God? What is happening? So as I'm in Montana signing the contract to buy this property with my partners, Billy and a couple other buddies, all of a sudden the song goes to radio and iHeart makes me iHeart on the Verge artist, which is like 80 immediate ads. And my song just skyrockets into the top 40 on the rock charts. And I was like, this is so weird being back where, I'm from and watching this radio success. And the charts closed yesterday, and we're now at number 11 on the active rock charts. And looking there and reading my name next to Metallica, Blink-182, Green Day, Foo Fighters, Tim Montana, I'm like, this is really bizarre. So
Right?
we've got our first top 15 hit and still got a bullet. We just announced a huge tour next year with Stained and Seether and Saint Asonia. And the minute they put me in the rock lane, which everyone always told me I was too rock for country, it just exploded up the charts. So I'm sitting here like, this is another interesting chapter of my life. I think we can make a Lifetime movie out of what has happened so far because it's very awesome.
Seriously, man. I was going to say you've got some great chapters put all together here, but it's who knew? Timing is everything, and you see that with some other artists, and maybe this kind of thing wouldn't have worked 10 years ago or whatever, but for whatever reason it's working like crazy now. Good for you, man. That's awesome news.
Yeah. So we're excited, and huge thank you to Rock Radio for getting behind me and support me and all the fans. And people are just funneling in this club. Like, there's the guy on Octane all the time, and he owns this really cool lodge in remote Montana. And so it's been packing the bar out constantly. People are coming up here because they're hearing about it, and they're hearing about it on the radio. And so the timing is pretty neat. I didn't think it was all going to happen, but it happened on the exact same day.
Wow.
That is so wild. What a story, man. God, that's. I'm I just want to hear, like, tell me more about these crazy things that happened to you. I'm thrilled to hear it. And I think this is a great story too for other artists of any genre who might be out there struggling, who might be thinking about maybe this just isn't for me. It's a great thing about just keep your head down, be you.
What is it Tim McGraw always says? You create your own breaks, or you create your own luck.
Yeah. And that was always my thing. I made it this far with a lot of brand deals, that people weren't familiar with that. And quite honest, I wasn't familiar with it. And, Traeger grills, Black Rifle, Polaris, I mean, all these things. Now Chevrolet I'm working with. And I just was like, if I can stay in the game long enough, I'll find my break. I didn't know it'd be 17 years, but my back hurts. But it's, I took these brand deals to pay my band's, pay, and then buy my Sprinter, and then buy my tour bus from Charlie Sheen. That's a whole nother story. But, to just keep the wheels turning. And I was like, if I keep touring, if I can stay in the game long enough and this and that, and this Montana opportunity came up, well, I'm going to work out of Montana now. And then, bam, it just goes on the radio. And in a month, it's, shooting up the charts. It's wild. So
Amazing.
Incredible. If people want to see more about you, learn more about you, they want to buy music, where can we go to do that?
My OnlyFans page. I'm doing all these feet pics now, and I'm just kidding. You go to timmontana.com, Instagram, Tim Montana, Facebook, all that stuff is at Tim Montana with the big blue check mark. There's a lot of fakers out there. Don't buy into it.
Okay, good deal, man. Awesome. Well, man, we really appreciate you taking the time to pull over on the side of the road and talk to us and share an incredible story. And we wish you nothing but the best, man. Hope it continues to blow up and grow for you in the way that you want it to.
Yeah. Tell Lee Bryce I'm coming for him.
Okay, will do.
On it. You got it. All right. Thanks a lot, Tim.